Welcome to the Baunfire. I am your host, Morgan, and this is a podcast about video game news, reviews, speculation, and rumors. This week, I'll be covering the Game Awards nominations and drama, The Last of Us 2 getting a remaster somehow, more and more layoffs, and much, much more. A few things before we get started. On YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, consider becoming a member, hit the like button, and comment down below, even if it's just to say hello. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes to help people find the show. A special thanks to all of the patrons and YouTube members, including producer level Hassan and YouTubes, and supporter level Neuronix, PK, Cage Nephilim, and Horseman. If you're interested in supporting this podcast for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/bonddiesel or become a member on YouTube. Gaming news. This week, we have a bunch of topics. First, the Game Awards nominations have been announced. The premiere announcement being Game of the Year, where we have 6 nominees. We have Baldur's Gate 3, Alan Wake 2, Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Spider-Man 2, and the Resident Evil 4 remake. This is basically the list I expected. I'm mostly good with it. I understand why all of these are on here. I think the two that maybe feel a little odd man out are Mario Brothers Wonder and the Resident Evil 4 remake. Wonder, it's tough to say that though, because Wonder reviewed so spectacularly. So really, it's maybe just a lack of familiarity with that game. The Resident Evil 4 remake is a really interesting one because this year, maybe even more so than others, we've had such a big debate on what kind of game should qualify for Game of the Year. And that's going to vary depending on the venue, what organization is doing the Game of the Year. Like, everyone has their own takes, right? So as we see now in the Game Awards, it seems like new releases and remakes qualify. There's other publications like the Giant Bomb where it sounds like you could essentially nominate a game that came out years ago, and if in the way they do their Game of the Year, if you could convince everyone that that's the right choice, then that's what would happen. Now, I think that cooler heads would prevail there and keep that from happening, but they basically just don't have a limit. And so with this year, there's, the two big things is that remakes with the Dead Space remake and Resident Evil 4, as well as even DLC or patches or whatever you want to consider it. With Cyberpunk 2077 and Phantom Liberty, there was a lot of speculation, or at least high hopes, that maybe this year we would see a remake make it into the Game of the Year nominations, and maybe even a game that actually came out multiple years ago, like Cyberpunk. Now, the Cyberpunk hopes were kind of dashed, but we did get Resident Evil 4 in here, and I kind of don't care that much. I think having a remake in a year where there were so many good original games is a bummer. There was a hot take by a journalist I saw that I thought was kind of dumb, where they're like, it's a shame to see that, what was it? I think it was Super Mario Brothers Wonder is the only game on here that isn't like a sequel or a previously existing game. Well, that's a shame. Like, that's kind of I think that's a bad take. Baldur's Gate 3 is technically a sequel, but it's literally by a brand new dev, and it's a brand new game and style of game, at least in large part. Alan Wake 2 is a sequel to a game from more than 10 years ago. I think you can make that argument with Tears of the Kingdom and Spider-Man 2. I mean, they are, for all intents and purposes, gigantic, extremely good expansions, essentially, to the games that came before them. And the Resident Evil 4 remake is interesting because it is a brand new game from scratch that is extremely heavily influenced by another game that came out many years ago. But it does have, all of the modern mechanics and technologies and all of the things you expect from a modern game. So, I get the argument for it being there. I just think that Resident Evil 4 especially there's like 5 games you could argue that deserve that last spot. Now, for all it's worth, none of those games would win, including Resident Evil 4. This is a pretty clear horse race, in my opinion, between Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears. I think Baldur's Gate 3 has been dominating that conversation for a while. I think that maybe Alan Wake 2 could sneak in there and maybe steal a victory, especially due to people being split between Tears and Baldur's Gate 3. Where like last year we had Ragnarok, the God of War sequel, and Elden Ring, when, you know, it was basically just between those two games. This year I think there is a very legitimate 3-way race, and it's really interesting how that could lead to one of them winning that we didn't really expect. But I don't know which one. Like, that's the thing. So my personal game of the year, I think I've settled on, probably is Baldur's Gate 3. I really, 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 really like Alan Wake 2, but I haven't finished it yet. And in a weird turn, I've kind of lost motivation to keep playing it. It's not the game's fault. For me, and we talked about it last week, but in 7 Day was last week for Mass Effect. I made a ton of content, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that stuff. And I honestly haven't really played many games in the last week because it's just, I'm just kind of toasted a little bit. I've just been kind of just hanging out. And I still intend on finishing Alan Wake 2 this year. And I do want to do a whole episode with some kind of focus on my game of the year thoughts and kind of putting together my own list. I do want to even try to do something with the people who listen on YouTube and then the podcast and on my Discord and stuff, and try to have maybe like some kind of game of the year discussion that involves everyone, where maybe I have all of you pick a game of the year in various ways, and we talk about that, and then I kind of give my own list. So we will be on the lookout for that. So. But yeah, if I had to put my money, if I was a betting man, I would put my money on Baldur's Gate 3 to win at least the Jeff Keighley Game of the Year award for the Game Awards ceremony. So with that, we know that show is coming up on December 7th. I do plan on co-streaming that. There's been some interesting things, even amongst the nominations, in that the indie game category, there's actually 2 of them. There's I believe first like their first indie game, and then just like a general best indie. And there's a lot of controversy that the game Dredge was involved in this, even though they have a publisher and they are owned by, I think it's Nexon, who is a gigantic company. And so nothing about Dredge is indie. The studio is an in-house studio for a gigantic publisher. Or a very wealthy publisher at least. And so it literally doesn't qualify as an indie game at all, except in style. And then you don't have Baldur's Gate 3 on these lists, even though it is very much an indie game, even though its budget and scale and its team is as big as any AAA game. But they don't have a publisher. They're self-published, which is the technical definition of an indie game. And so it's really interesting having a game that isn't a technically independent game on these indie best game lists, and Baldur's Gate 3, which would just easily win both, at least the best indie game of the year award, it was left off. And so I'm really curious too if there will ever be any conversation from Jeff about that. He claims he doesn't monitor or kind of editorialize these awards in any way. I mean, we'll never really know. But it's an interesting conversation that people have been having. Another one is there's been kind of a back and forth, and people really encouraging Jeff to make some kind of statement about all of the layoffs that have happened this year. There's been so many more layoffs even in the last week that at the end of the show, I have a layoff roundup, because for some reason that's a thing that we have to have, because there's 3 stories to talk about with that. And it's interesting. There's some people who feel like Jeff doesn't really, that's not, the point of the Game Awards. He doesn't need to bring that stuff up. It's a moment for celebration. And then there's other people who feel like he, has a large voice and a large influence in the game industry and that he should use that for good. My thing is that, like, I agree. I think he should use his influence and his platform to, even just call out some of the kind of gross stuff that's going on in the industry. He's been asked to do this before. I believe that years ago there was a thing of kind of getting him to try to push, like, some of the abuse that, like, that women receive in gaming, both as in communities and in the development sphere, especially when it comes to game devs and how they're treated differently, and so on and so forth. If I remember correctly, it was a pretty half-hearted effort. And what's interesting here is some of the callouts for Jeff to say something about this seems to come from a place of people thinking that Jeff is like the king of gamers, and he's like here to represent our concerns and stuff. Like, I hope people are beginning to realize that Jeff Keighley is like the most corporate person in games. Like, he is. If he was starting up his Cyberpunk playthrough, he wouldn't even see the other selections. He would pick Corpo immediately. Like, I really, it's interesting how he is kind of tried to foster this persona of like the anti E3, where like, the ESA is a literal, like, basically political influence group that tries to push the perspective or the interest of all of the big gaming companies in American government, and I assume probably international government as well. So trying to, regulation and things like that, trying to keep those at bay. And so the ESA is a gross political involved corpo, suck-upping, organization. So it's always been really interesting to me how Keighley pushes so hard and kind of like trying to paint the ESA and E3 as, this, he's always taking his pot shots at them and doing his thing with announcing things right after E3 announces bad news and stuff. When, people need to realize that he is just as corporate, but he's one person. It's literally put down into one person who seems to really, really, really care a lot about, rubbing elbows with famous people and getting deals with all of the biggest publishers and studios to show off their games. And I know that there's always this thing of people being like, oh, well, he charges people to have trailers on his show, and he has to do these commercials that kind of look like trailers, but they're really just commercials during his show. And, like, I hope people realize that he does that for some of those, but he almost certainly is volunteering or even paying for some of the exclusives he gets. Like this isn't a, like, charitable situation or anything like that. And so I just, people wanting and hoping that Jeff Keighley is going to take some like anti-corporate, anti-publisher, anti-firing people because capitalism is gross stance must not be paying attention to who this guy is. He's essentially gotten to where he is through like nepotism, through his dad's connections and in the film industry, and likely with privilege and things like that in general. And like, yeah, like, he's got a cool story that he started writing and stuff as a teenager, but he got that access, because of connections, right? Like, it wasn't just a normal thing to happen that could have happened to anybody. So I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that he does take a stance and have something significant to say, and kind of pointing out how greedy and gross this layoff situation is, and what's been going on this year and in other years, and forever in some ways. But I don't know why people think that that's going to happen. That is, other than to just do it for like some PR, which is like, again, a super corporate thing to do. I don't know. I'm not expecting it. If it happens, that's great. I'll be very proud of the boy. Okay, so moving on to some PlayStation news. This was kind of a slow week, so bear with me here. For PlayStation, there is supposedly a PlayStation 5 version of The Last of Us 2 incoming. This has been an ongoing conversation over the last, so many years. It's focused around The Last of Us because it's the best example. But Sony does some weird stuff, man. Like, Sony does stuff that if they weren't the market leader in their industry, in the gaming industry, if they weren't making so much more money than everyone else, and if they weren't putting out like really legitimately good games pretty consistently every year, people would like hate them if they could see through the veil. Because what's going to happen here, and it's not confirmed yet, so if I'm wrong, I'll absolutely report on it later. But this PlayStation 5 version of The Last of Us 2, a game that only came out 3 years ago, is almost certainly going to be $70. And it's only if we're lucky that they'll do a upgrade path. So in some previous games, they have done a thing where, say you own the PlayStation 4 version of The Last of Us 2, if you have that, you'll be able to pay 10 or 20 bucks to upgrade to the new version. But even that's gross, because what's going to happen here is, and I think sometimes this is a fandom thing. People kind of don't think about it or don't hold these companies to account because of fandom and stuff like that. But what this The Last of Us 2 PlayStation 5 version is going to be, for the most part, is likely just better textures. And the reason people think that's an upgrade, because I've even seen people call this a remaster and it's not a remake for sure. And it's like kind of a remaster, but even calling, a next gen update for a game that's only 3 years old a remaster feels gross to me, because if Sony did day one PC games and say back in 2020 when The Last of Us 2 came out, they would have released the PlayStation 4 version that had, that ran the way it ran on the PlayStation 4. And then they would have had a PC version that was the same game, but had basically where you could adjust your own settings, and you would be able to adjust it up to 4K, 240 FPS. Like, you would have all that tech and, that ability. And then the PlayStation 4 version would just be, they just would have all those settings dialed down. And then when the PlayStation 5 came out, they would have just done a next gen update that would have bumped up to 60 FPS, given it all of the fidelity modes, and then increased all of those settings to a point where the PlayStation 5, could run it better than the PS4. Maybe not as good as top end PCs, but they shouldn't charge for that. Like that's just an update. That's a patch, is what that should be. But what's going to happen here is, because there is no PC version, so people are going to convince themselves that the Last of Us PlayStation 4 edition didn't have these up-res textures in the game already, which it almost certainly does. It's just, its level of detail and stuff, it keeps it lower for the PS4 and even the PS5 when you're playing the PS4 version. The people are going to convince themselves that this PS5 version that they're going to charge even an upgrade fee, but even up to a full $70 for, is the same game. They're going to convince themselves that they did all this work to put in these better graphics, but it's, not to simplify things too much, because this stuff is always more complicated than most of us think, but it'll be essentially the equivalent of them ticking up some settings. I've seen people talk about that it could be like a director's cut and involve new content, and like, that's cool, but like, that would probably amount to more of like a DLC or something like that maybe, could still be just part of a patch, which a lot of games do, or at least would just be like maybe not $70, maybe it would be a $30 or $40 DLC, because I've seen people say that they may add, some more missions, some more story elements, things like that. Unless they're gonna like double the size of the game or something, you're still getting to a point where, at least my interpretation and my understanding, is that they won't like be redoing everything to have this PS5 version. It's mostly just going to be ticking up settings that should already be there, because I assume they're working on the PC version as well that they'll put out in 3 more years. And it's interesting. It's really interesting, because I brought this up in a few places, specifically on the Kind of Funny subreddit. Kind of Funny is technically not focused on any one platform due to the people who are in the company, and it's a very PlayStation centric company and community, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's really weird how, if you point out like, hey, this should probably just be an update, and this probably shouldn't be a $70 game or even a paid upgrade, people go to bat and absolutely refuse to agree. And even to the point where people made the point, someone responded to me and said, Well, when The Last of Us 1 came out on PS3, they did a PS4 remaster like a year later and charge full price for it, and or charge for it. I don't know what the price is. And I want to like rip out what's left of my hair and be like, exactly, that's the problem. But people have just gotten used to it, or it's like a fandom console war thing. I don't know. But we don't see this from other companies. We specifically, I just off the top of my head, I know that like the Division 2 did, like a next gen upgrade. It wasn't huge. It basically just allowed the next gen games to run at a higher quality and at 60 FPS. It's not like it was anything revolutionary, but they didn't charge for it. It wasn't an upgrade fee. It was just having the new console. There's been all these rumors for all these years of Red Dead Redemption 2 and whether or not they would eventually have a PS5 and Xbox Series version that would have 60 FPS, 4K, all of that stuff. And while that hasn't happened yet, and it probably never will, I don't think they would charge for it. I could be wrong, but I believe when they did the same thing for Grand Theft Auto 5, either with the PS4 or the PS5 or the complementary Xbox versions, they, as far as I know, they didn't charge for it. So it's a weird thing. Like just like The Last of Us 2 just came out a couple years ago. Like it's not been out very long, and so to paint them putting out a next gen version and charging for it and kind of cloud that by being like, well, it's a remaster. Like I don't think you remaster 3-year-old games. At least I don't think you do. I could be wrong. And this, just to be clear and just to throw it out there, maybe this is my own bias. Maybe I'm not seeing this as clearly as I could. I do like Xbox. I would consider myself an Xbox fan, and I do tend to believe that PlayStation kind of gets away with what I consider anti-consumer moves, because people just really like their platform and their games, and because they kind of dominate the market. And so there's kind of like a fandom thing that plays in. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about all of that. Maybe this is fair. Maybe they did put in so much work into this new version of the Last of Us 2. It's gonna include so much stuff that it's gonna be worth a full price game. And I'm just a fuddy-duddy that's too focused on the console war to have a clear thought on this. I don't know, but you're welcome to tell me. On the Xbox front, the only real news I had was that the NVIDIA GeForce Now system, their live streaming, game playing system, can now sync with Xbox Game Pass. So if you have NVIDIA GeForce Now and you have Game Pass, you can hook those up together and play your Xbox Game Pass games through NVIDIA GeForce Now, which I've always heard extremely good things about that service from NVIDIA. It's depending on the tier you pay for, you can get the equivalent performance from some pretty impressive spec machines, and it's just streaming. You just do everything through streaming. Now, I assume has all of the caveats there of typical streaming issues when it comes to latency and needing a fast connection and some graphical hitches and stuff. But if that's a thing you're into or you like, and you already have both of these, then it looks like this could be a complementary service. And then we have Nintendo, where we found out that Bandai Namco is creating a couple new Nintendo-focused studios so that they can kind of probably separate responsibilities a bit. And we have Studio 2 and Studio S, and they will focus on Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, and other games. This shouldn't be that surprising because probably the worst kept secret in gaming is that more than likely in 2024, Nintendo is going to have their next gen console will come out, the successor of the Switch, and it's almost certain that there's going to be a new Mario Kart and a new Smash Brothers game and a bunch of other games that you just expect to come out whenever Nintendo has new hardware. So I'm assuming this is just preparation for that. I don't think there's anything that crazy here. I suspect I'm starting to get a feeling that from all three of the big platforms, we're going to see some like really big announcements at the beginning of 2024, because we don't know anything for PlayStation right now. Like there's rumors that the Wolverine game from Insomniac could come out next year, but so shortly after Spider-Man 2, that's kind of hard to believe, but they put out games quickly, and so it's possible. But other than that, there's just a lot of rumors. Like we know that the Final Fantasy VII remake, the second part of it is coming next year, and for at least for now and probably forever, that's a PlayStation exclusive. But that's still not a first party game. So it's weird. I'm expecting at some point to get some big blowout announcement. There's also the possibility that for PlayStation, that the COVID may finally be catching up to them. I think that PlayStation's done such a fantastic job of putting out a bunch of amazing games in the years during COVID and then shortly after, where you've seen Xbox and some of the other big publishers really struggle with that. It seems like PlayStation just had a bunch of games in the right part of the pipeline, where like The Last of Us 2 came out, the Spider-Man 2 just came out recently, God of War Ragnarok last year. And while they had some delays and stuff, it was just, we haven't seen that downtick in production from PlayStation. And I'm starting to wonder if that maybe all of the time they spent, all the time and resources they spent making sure those games came out the last few years may mean that maybe 2024 could be a slower year for PlayStation, or not. Maybe they'll have like 10 bangers. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Same with Xbox. I'm just like they did last year. I'm expecting in January or maybe early February for them to do a showcase of basically, this is what we have this year. Here it is. Here's what we're putting out. The rumors right now are games like Senua's Saga. There's been rumors of like the Perfect Dark game and stuff. I'm not expecting that. Same with Fable. I haven't really heard any rumors or any talk about how far along those games are, but it certainly doesn't seem like they're in a place where we're going to see them in the next year. But maybe I'm wrong. So I suspect we'll get that from Xbox. And then Nintendo, I think it's pretty easy to assume that fairly early in the year, we're going to have some big showcase from them where they show off their new console and they do a bunch of announcements for games that are coming for that console. So I think the beginning of 2024 could end up being a pretty fun year for gamers. Moving on to non-platform, big platform news, we have Larian, the makers of Baldur's Gate 3, have announced that they are putting out a physical deluxe edition of that game for $79.99, which includes the game, a physical version of that game, and includes, like, none of it looks like that crazy, but a bunch of swag, maps and stickers, and a 3-disc soundtrack, and all kinds of crazy stuff. So, if you don't have Baldur's Gate 3 already, if you want the hard, physical version of it, this is a really, really, really good deal. And even if you're just a big fan of the franchise and the game, I think a lot of people are going to buy it just for that. And it's still not that bad of a deal. Like, I think it's probably worth it. For most people, I think that game has definitely brought in a fan base that wasn't there before. And I think things like this are going to get eaten up. They've also kind of, without actually saying it, announced, it sounds like at the Game Awards, they're going to make an announcement about the Xbox version of Baldur's Gate 3, and it's almost certain that we'll be getting a release date for that. And there's even some rumors that they may do a shadow drop and release it during the show. What's interesting about this is this comes on the heels of some news recently where supposedly while they were trying to make Baldur's Gate 3 work on the Xbox Series S, they found a way to potentially save around 34% of RAM, of memory, that the game needs to run on, which would be huge. One, to just get it working on the Series S, which has been the reason it's been delayed on Xbox, which means it will run way better on the PlayStation and Series X, PlayStation 5 and Series X. And then honestly, even for PC players, probably means that we're going to see a pretty big performance boost for Baldur's Gate 3 because they it's a pretty intense game, especially in the later gameplay in Act 3. It's a pretty hardware intensive game, so cool. I'm glad more people are going to get to play this. I still think that Xbox should be kicking themselves in the butt for not getting this game day one on Game Pass, because for the price I think they mentioned, I think it was like $5 million, they would have, oh man. Out of all of those leaks that came from the Activision acquisition trials and documents, that leak right there where they could have gotten that game very cheap, exclusive day one on the Xbox, That one stings, and that one's probably got to sting for quite a while. We had the announcement of a new studio. Mac Walters, formerly of BioWare for a really long time, announced that they are heading up a new studio called Worlds Unite, that's owned by NetEase. This is kind of a mixed one, as someone who's become a very big Mass Effect fan, but has missed out on a majority of the drama and all of the stuff over the years. Knowing that Mac Walters has been around even before Mass Effect at BioWare, but specifically being a lead writer on Mass Effect 2 and 3, and then, I believe being one of the directors on Andromeda, and then being, I believe, in charge of the story in Anthem, and then for a short time being on Dragon Age Dreadwolf before he left recently. I get the general feeling that, like, this is one of those announcements that you would think BioWare fans would be like, oh yes, yeah, cool, another BioWare vet is doing a new studio, and they're gonna make the games that BioWare can't make anymore. I got a much more muted response on this one. I don't want to say the community doesn't like Mac Walters, but a lot of people blame Mac for a lot of the pretty big issues when it comes to story and lore in Mass Effect 2 and 3. And it definitely seems like this announcement was kind of like, people were like, oh, cool. I mean, he is an industry vet, so that's good. But I didn't really see anyone being like, oh, crap, I can't wait for Mac Walters' new game. The way that people kind of are with, like, Casey Hudson, who is another BioWare bigwig and the creator of Mass Effect, when he founded his own studio, Humanoid. So we'll see how that plays out in the long run. What's interesting about these studio announcements is that it is always interesting to see the announcement, but then you kind of have to remember that they aren't going to be putting out a game for 5 or 6 years at least. Like, that's going to be that won't have any fruit for a very long time. So we'll have to wait and see on that. A game people have been waiting a long time for the fruit of is Dragon's Dogma 2. A release date might have gotten leaked due to the European Ratings Board, PEGI, having putting out their rating for the game, as well as what appeared to be a release date of March 22nd, 2024. This was around the same time that Capcom and the developers of Dragon's Dogma put out that they're going to be doing a 15-minute gameplay showcase on November 28th. This is a game that I'm kind of low-key really excited for, especially after getting so into Baldur's Gate 3. I'm not really into high fantasy medieval style games, but I love Baldur's Gate 3. And while Dragon's Dogma is not a turn-based game, which is something I'm actually excited about, it definitely has similar vibes. The original Dragon's Dogma has it's a remaster, or I think it's a remaster. I don't think it's a remake. That was done for, I believe, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. I think it's originally a PS3 and 360 game. I could be wrong. Please correct me in the comments if I am. But I've played that remaster, and it's dated, and I didn't get super sucked into it, but I played enough of it, and I felt enough of it to be like, ooh, I would love a modern version of this. And Dragon's Dogma 2 is literally a modern version of that first game. So obviously with a new story and stuff like that. So if that game modernizes and brings forward all of the stuff it was doing originally, and then brings it up to a more contemporary, style and stuff like that, I'm predicting right now that Dragon's Dogma 2 could easily be the Baldur's Gate 3 of 2024. It's I think people got a taste of that, and kind of that really in-depth, especially like interpersonal relationships and all that stuff. If Dragon's Dogma does the things I think it's probably going to do in this next game, I could see a lot of people being really sucked into that. And what's really interesting about that is that if Dragon's Dogma comes out in March, and we're looking at the Dragon Age Dreadwolf release maybe being in like May or June, that would be really interesting, because it would either suck all of the breath out of Dragon Age if people play a game that has a similar idea and maybe is better, maybe isn't. We don't have any idea yet. A couple months before it comes out, or people could get Dragon's Dogma 2, play it for a couple months, start to slow down on it, and then a game like Dragon Age Dreadwolf comes out, and they're like, hey, if you like that, here's our version. It's Dragon Age. You've heard of Dragon Age before. And so I'm really curious to how that may play out. So I'm excited to see more from Dragon's Dogma 2, and we'll see how it plays out in the long run, in comparison to a potential release of Dragon Age Dreadwolf. Just very briefly, we got some new gameplay from the upcoming Rocksteady game, the Suicide Squad game. This is a really interesting one. This game has pretty much been universally panned. People being really mad about a bunch of stuff that they don't like. That it looks like it's going to be a games of a service. It's going to have all of these elements that people just don't want, and that are kind of stuck a few years behind, which is fair. I've been talking a lot about that as well. What I will say is that this new trailer they put out with this gameplay looks a lot better than it did from what we've seen before. And it does look like it's going to have some fun writing. The story is going to be kind of fun and goofy, but with some kind of scary or cool moments as well. I'm not as willing to just write this off as so many people are. What really frustrates me, and maybe it becomes like a devil's advocate situation, is that it seems like a lot of the talking heads and the game commentary business, like they start, like they sit around and they like get all hyped up to like hate stuff now. And this is one of the games that definitely received that treatment, in my opinion. And it seems like they're just so determined to hate this game. Like, I feel like this game could come out and be masterful, and you'll still see a bunch of people give it like 6 and 7s just because they can't let it be good, because they said it would be bad for so long. So I'm seeing some people turn around a little bit and seem like that, maybe they are somewhat willing to potentially, give this game a chance. Or, it seems like some of the talking heads have been kind of, even throwing out the possibility of like, oh, does this actually look kind of good? I think it might look good, but we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it won't be good. Maybe it's going to be terrible. I have no idea, but I really hope it's good. I'm kind of sick at this point of wanting things to fail. I think, I've been guilty of it in the past. I think people in the industry right now are extremely guilty of it. And I think that sucks, because even bad games had a ton of passion behind them. And I really hate the idea of like rooting for something to fail that people spent, some people, their entire careers on so far. So we'll see. To wrap things up here, we have the layoff roundup. Embracer Group announces that they've laid off 904 more people, and that we should expect more layoffs, studio closures, and studio sales, and probably IP sales as well in the future. They have some gigantic payment on a loan due in April that they only have like half the funds for right now, and so they're going to have to raise that money somehow. Some big deal they were trying to do with some Saudi Arabian money people didn't go through, and they are proving that Embracer Group just has no idea what they're doing. They got in way over their heads, and they never had a plan on how to make it work. And now hundreds of thousands of people are suffering because of it, because they couldn't hold their beer. And it really sucks. And what people need to realize, there are some really big brands and really big IPs and really amazing studios wrapped up in all of this that are only going to suffer. And while I'm sure a lot of the prominent ones and the prominent devs and the prominent IPs, even if Embracer Group folds and falls apart, will get saved, there's a lot that won't. And it's really hard watching Embracer Group just, watching the inevitable approach that they are going to fold. They are going to have to sell off or shut down all of the studios they have. They are going to have to sell off all of the IP they own. And the people in charge are probably going to make out scot-free and probably very rich. And all of the people who are actually trying to make this work are going to be out of work and hoping to find a way to make a living. Embracer Group sucks. And then moving on, Sega of America is currently trying to lay off 80 unionized workers. I don't know a ton about that stuff, so I won't pretend to. I'm just under the impression that these workers are straight up unionized, and that makes firing them extremely challenging unless you have some really good reasoning. And it's kind of a thing where you can't just lay them off because you're trying to save money. There's more to it than that. And then finally, Amazon laid off 180 people, including their entire Crown channel, which I guess was a number of people who specifically worked on one channel they had that I think was trying to do, kind of like pump up games and stuff like that. And then their game growth team, which was, I assume, part of that. and they're going to try to focus more of their efforts on their Prime Gaming brand and all of that. So this puts us over something like 7,000 layoffs this year, despite the fact that much of the industry is having record profits. I understand it's a much more complicated situation than just saying those words together. But from a layman's point of view, it just seems weird that a lot of these companies are doing really well, even to the point of some of them having like record years, while they're also laying off hundreds of thousands of people. One thing I didn't mention about the Game Awards is one of the best game community treatment or whatever award, or community team or something, nominated Destiny 2. And if you don't remember that story or didn't look into it yourself, you will know that they laid off half of their community team, including people like Liana Rupert, who is, a pretty prominent person in the Destiny community, obviously, but also the Mass Effect community. She's a big fan and has been for a long time. So I won't pretend like I understand it all. I'm sure there are technical reasons why these things are happening, but just from a layman point of view, from a meta overhead point of view, it just seems pretty messed up, seems super greedy, and seems like maybe this kind of stuff shouldn't be happening while other people are making out like bandits off of it. But what do I know? As for listener questions, we had a couple saved up. We have a couple here from YouTube's. What is your favorite dialogue and or choice system that you've experienced in a game? I'm pretty sure I answered that last week, so I'm just going to skip it. And the other one, the new one, was what was your favorite Madden and Call of Duty? Madden, I would look back to, God, I think it was 07 when it was on PC still, before they stopped doing that. I don't know if they're doing it again. I actually haven't paid attention. And there was just something about playing on PC that was really cool. I can't even really explain it. I don't know if it was even much better than playing on console, but I just liked it, and that's what I did. So I remember that pretty clearly. I also will go back to the days of like 98, I think, when my dad and I used to play all the time, and when we would have these like grudge matches. I'll never forget that neither one of us ever kicked field goals. We would always fake it on punts and field goals, and so I remember all the time John Madden's voice going, "It's a fake." And the other thing I remember from those old games was whenever you would tackle someone really hard, John Madden would say, "He got up looking out of his ear hole." So some good memories there. With Call of Duty, it's got to be Call of Duty 4. Modern Warfare is just, I played all of the ones before that, and I've played most of them since. But something about Modern Warfare, it came out, I was in college. I was living with roommates. We all had Xbox 360s and Xbox Live and headsets. And for years, we played Modern Warfare a ton, and Modern Warfare 2 when it came out, and so on. We competed in game battles, if anyone remembers that website where there was like rankings and leaderboards and tournaments and all that. We played in that and did really good in it. We were really high ranked players in that during college years. That website is actually just now shutting down, which blew my mind that it was still alive. And so that I had to message all my buddies about that and about that end of an era. And so those are probably the ones I remember the most. I have kept up with Call of Duty more so than Madden. I will play Madden when it pops up on the EA Play thing that you get with Game Pass. You can play like 10 hours of the new EA games. And I'll always play those, a few hours of Madden and FIFA and when those games come out. But it's been a long time since I've gotten like deep into it. I'm really hoping that the next college game that comes out next year will go back to some of their legacy where like those football games, especially college, used to be basically like an RPG, but with sports, with recruiting and the way you treated your team and the way you prepared. And like you recruited freshmen and you would try to build them up and put them in positions where they would perform the best and all this stuff. It really was like my first RPG games, and I didn't even realize it at the time. But now as an adult, I do. And so I have a lot of hopes that next college game may kind of get back to that, but we'll have to wait and see. And then Call of Duty, I buy basically every modern Call of Duty game. I'm kind of done with the old like Black Ops games and stuff, or World War II. I was never really interested in the like futuristic ones, but Modern Warfare 2 from 2000, or Modern Warfare from 2019, Modern Warfare 2 that came out was just like last year, I think. I actually did not buy 3 because I saw all the stuff about it. But I definitely keep up more with those. I love the stories. I'll play a couple weeks of the multiplayer and then I bounce. I never got into Warzone. But I still generally like both franchises. I'm more involved with Call of Duty. And then the last question you had here is, are they missing anything that your favorites had? I think they're missing some of the soul, but I also think that what's really missing is my childhood and me being a younger guy and not having all the responsibilities and the things I have to do now. Where, I literally used to be able to just wake up and play Call of Duty all day when I was in college and stuff like that. And that just isn't a thing anymore. I can't do that anymore. So as much as I would love to, and sometimes I do my best to relive those glory days, quote unquote, that's probably what's missing. But it's a great question. If you have any of your own questions or topics for next week, please let me know in the comments of the YouTube video. You can jump into my Discord, which there's a link in the Linktree link in the description, or you can shoot me an email, or you can send a carrier pigeon. I don't know. Good luck. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for listening. Please interact with the show in any way that you can. This being a solo podcast, the best way for me to get feedback and ideas for other shows is to hear from you all. So please get to me one way or the other. I would very much appreciate that. And if you have feedback or thoughts on the show, I am always open to hearing that. You can find me all over the internet as Bon Diesel, especially over on Twitch, where I do try to stream a few times a week and we can talk about all of this stuff. And that is a multi-stream. So if you follow me on YouTube, I will also be on there when I am streaming. If you want to support this content, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. You can join as a YouTube member. Both of those are as little as $1. You can subscribe over at Twitch. You can even use your Amazon Prime free sub if you want. Or you can check out my merch and other things in the Linktree link down in the description below. That is all I have. So until next time.